Hello and welcome to a brand new show on the talkSPORT Cricket YouTube channel and also via the talkSPORT podcast feed. Following on India, myself and Jarrod Kimber, we're going to be joined by a selection of top guests every week focusing on Indian cricket. India cricket is exclusively live on talkSPORT. We have the rights to all of India's home series between now and 2028. And we've got some really exciting news for you coming up in the next couple of weeks about a couple of those series. But for now, sit back and enjoy. We're going to be joined by Harsha Bhogle, the legendary broadcaster, as well as Mohammad Isam from Cricinfo, the Bangladesh correspondent, looking ahead to the Bangladesh series and also ahead to the rest of the home summer in India, all the way up to the border Gavaskar in Australia. Thanks so much for joining us here on Following on India with myself, Jon Norman, and also Jarrod Kimber. Okay, Jarrod, well, we're going to start off the first of this new series doing things a little bit differently. We do something called Stock Report. Is that right? Stock Report, Stock Take, something like that.
Stocks.
Chris Stocks. Sponsored by The Independent. It's not.
What a start.
What a start. This is what it's all about. This is the good stuff. Essentially, we are, instead of looking back at a series and giving a stock report, whether the stock of a player has gone up or down, what we're going to do is we're going to start off at the start of this before the Bangladesh series and ahead of the New Zealand series. Kind of going to ask the question, where are these players now and where do we expect them to be at the end of 2 tests against Bangladesh and 3 tests against New Zealand? So let's start with the skipper, shall we? Rohit Sharma, obviously, the last time we saw him, I think, was him sailing off into the sunset, holding aloft the T20 World Cup. I'm not sure, did he even play in the Sri Lanka series? I think he might have done, actually. Yeah, he did. Either way, the last time we saw him in the UK, because that series kind of disappeared behind the paywall, was winning a trophy, the first trophy since, what, 2011?
No, 13 was the Champions Trophy.
13, yeah, that doesn't really count. 2011. I mean, let's be honest.
I mean, I don't think it counts, but other cricket fans get really angry when I say that.
Yeah, but the fact that the tournament kind of disappeared and nobody.
It was cancelled twice. It was cancelled twice, and it changed name 3 times.
Exactly, and when it came back, everybody was like, "Really? It's going to be a Champions Trophy again? Are we doing that?" I'd rather see the Champions League. The T20 franchise tournament, which was completely warped as well.
Yeah.
Essentially, Kyron Pollard plays for every team. But yeah, let's start with Rohit. Obviously, his stock is incredibly high. The last test series that India played was at home against England. They were walloped 4-1. So you'd have to say just a continuation of what we've had from Rohit in terms of his batting at the top of the order and also his captaincy.
Yeah, no, he's very high at the moment. He the last 2 years he's averaging in low to mid 40s, which doesn't sound great, but when you consider some of the wickets that the Indians have played on, he's looked like a different species. So yeah, he's very high. I think the interesting thing for him, and you can throw Virat in here as well, is that what do they want to get out of the next couple of years? And I think Rahul Dravid made it really clear that these players want to win the World Test Championship, right? And so for Virat and Rohit, that's the thing that they haven't got yet. They've been in 2 finals and they want to win it. So I expect them to, over the next, whatever it is, 6 months, really focus in on that, as something that they want to do. So yeah, Rohit's still in very good form, probably, still the most dynamic and feared batter in the Indian side, I think, just because of the rate at which he could score and everything else. So yeah, he's very high. I don't think he can get much out of this series, right? Like, there's a couple of players who can get masses out of this series and a couple of players who can't. He's one who probably can't get a lot out of this series.
Cricket and all sport conjure up these narratives around players or teams. It's happening in the Premier League at the moment. Everybody was talking about Liverpool, Arne Slot, the new captain, the new coach coming in, replacing Jurgen Klopp, and then swatting Manchester United aside, going unbeaten. They haven't lost. They hadn't conceded a goal, and then they lose at home to Nottingham Forest. And you could just feel the universe just kind of like shifting. And hang on, we've just spent the last 4 weeks pushing this narrative, and now we've got to spin it on its head, and we've got to go this way. Jaiswal, I mean, we're all sitting here saying this is the guy for the now and the future, but I don't know. There's just something out there that just suggests to me that, like all young players, they're going to hit a bump in the road at some point. I'm not saying it's going to be against Bangladesh. I'm not going to say it's going to be against New Zealand, but the narrative about him, you know, has been so high that it's almost inviting that kind of fork in the road. It's kind of inviting that kind of situation to rear its head. Are we expecting too much?
Yeah, if you were drafting players now, like if every cricketer in the world in Test cricket was available to draft, I'm not sure there's anyone who goes number one ahead of him when you look at potential, what he's already done, and his age, right? But it's really interesting. He can only, let's say he makes 300s in these next 5 tests, right? And he heads to Australia with even higher expectations, which is almost impossible. But let's say that's the level he gets to. He's then got Australia and England conditions, which is not something he spent a lot of time having to deal with. Which is, we saw him struggle in South Africa. Now, those wickets, everyone struggled, right? Except for, I think, one Aiden Markram innings, everyone looked, troubled.
Rahul. I think Rahul.
Aiden
Markram said it was one of the top 5 innings he's ever seen in his life or something.
There weren't too many people who actually stayed in long enough in those. So we don't know enough about Jaiswal at the moment. So there is a possibility that because his stock is already so high, that he goes to A triple plus level, right? And then he gets to Australia and Hazelwood starts landing the ball on a length and he just has to start again. And so these series, I would put Jaiswal and Sarfaraz Khan in the exact same situation. I don't think anyone doubts that they are fantastic players in Asian conditions and that they are fantastic talents who could be 10, 15-year players for India, right? Just on talent alone, forget everything else you know about Jaiswal specifically. On talent alone, we know that. The problem is that as he keeps building this, it actually be better for him just to have a normal series where he just averages like 40 against Bangladesh and 40 against New Zealand. No one notices him. Then he gets to Australia, and he gets to be able to do that. But if he actually goes ballistic, which he could do, I think that could cause him some issues in expectations that he may not be able to match yet. Like, he's still young, he's still developing. He's not the full package. And you look at Sachin Tendulkar, who was a fantastic player in his teenage years, right? He's a lot better player in his 20s and peak, right? Like, we have to understand that players develop at different speeds. So that would be my worry for both of those guys. So I don't think there's that much that Sarfaraz Khan or Yashavi Jaiswal can get out of this particular five test block.
Shubman Gill, I find him an interesting one because
you don't believe in Shubman Gill, do you? You're a Shubman Gill denier.
No, I do. No, I'm not. I'm definitely not a Shubman Gill denier because if I close my eyes, I can see his face. He exists.
He exists.
He was nearly out the side though. He's a very nervy starter. He finished the England series very strongly, as did India. But there was a period during that series you didn't know which way it was going to go with Gill. Kind of always felt India would eventually, crack the code with Bazball and realise they just needed to play the game rather than the team. But essentially, Gill, he doesn't like opening. He doesn't like batting at 3. He preferred to be opening. But I mean, once he's in, and of course, he again, he's got all the shots. But again, it'd be interesting to see if we're going in with this. Sharma, you'd say his stock would be at 9 out of 10. Jaiswal would probably be about 8 or 9.
Probably 9.
Probably 9. Gill, I mean, it's high. 7, 8.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting series for him because he's going to be put under more pressure in the other conditions, especially if he doesn't like batting first drop and he's going to have to do it in not at home, right? So I think it's a really interesting series for him from that perspective. He's not a good starter, right? And if I was Gautam Gambhir, that's what I'd be working on with him, of just like, forget everything else, right? we want you to work out how to get to 15 runs, because we think once you get to 15 runs, there's not going to be any issue there.
Yeah.
And he's probably going to be an opener, right? My guess is that when Rohit retires, he just moves up to open batting. But what if Rohit plays for 2 years? Shubman Gill has to work out how to play in this middle order position, right? Or this top order position in this case. He has to work that out, and it's not a natural thing for him. That's not the way he thinks about cricket. But if they can get that happening for a little while, we know that once he's in, he's basically as hard to dismiss as almost anyone in the world. But he is more of a, I don't know, Sean Marsh type of cricketer, right? Like a Dean Jones type of cricketer, where you just like, for the first 20 balls, you kind of feel like you can get him out every single delivery. And then after that, you're just like, well, he's going to make 70 minimum now, isn't he?
Yeah. Virat Kohli. Now, something about Virat Kohli, and for reasons that are completely justified, but, you know, was it the Border Gavaskar Trophy in 2016? You were out there. Was it 2016? Mm-hmm. And Kohli missed the final test. Yep. Border Gavaskar last time round, he missed 4 of the 5 tests. Yeah. The England-India series, or the India-England series, he missed 5 tests, all 5 tests. All justifiable reasons. But these are the big series, right? I'm not saying Bangladesh and New Zealand are the big series, but we're heading towards the mother of all the big series. And it would be a surprise if Kohli wasn't, even if people aren't writing or saying it, you know, he will be aware that he's missed out on some of India's crowning moments, you know, glory moments. And I suppose coming into this series, his stock is high. Of course it is, but he'll be mindful of that.
I think there's a couple of things with him. I think World Test Championship is what he wants, right? I think he's probably looking at Joe Root at the moment and being like, he's gone to a level that I haven't been to since 2019, right? And I also think there's just an element of last year. I know it was it was about 8 tests. He started to make runs again. So, you know, he goes through 2020, 2021, 2022, averaging 25 in Test cricket, like, which is ridiculous for someone of his talent. And then last year starts to make those runs again. And I think there's an element of, I think he should feel comfortable enough that he's back. And like, you know, you look at his footwork and the way he's moving and everything else. And, you know, he's now won that trophy for India. So a bit of the legacy that he was struggling with has been fortified, right? But he wants the World Test Championship, and I'd be shocked. And I don't just mean Kohli here. I think Williamson and Smith, I think they're all looking at Root now and being like, wait a minute, we were in front of him for a long period of time, and he's just jumped us. It'd be really interesting to see if that jogs these guys back in to be really, really competitive. And you think about these 5 tests, we are, especially for the first part of the series, I don't think they're going to have raging turners. I'm not saying the wickets won't spin, but I don't think they'll have some of the really, really juiced up wickets they've had before, just because you don't want to give Bangladesh the option to just come in and rag the ball sideways against you with their spinners. So there might be some very good batting pitches he can get on a roll. And then once he gets on a roll, then he's going to the Australian pitches, which he loves. So, but he's got about 9 tests where I think he should be looking at going back to the old Virat Kohli. So I think you're right, he's quite high. I'll be really interested to see how many runs he makes in these next 5 test matches based on where his mind is more than anything else. But yeah, I thought last year there was definitely, and I mean, forget the averages, just watching him, you know, watching him in T20 cricket and ODI cricket and everywhere else, he just looked like he was moving a little bit better, a little bit crisper than he had been before. I think he had cluttered his life with so many things, and he needed to just get back to cricket for a little bit. And I think he's been slightly better at doing that.
Are you expecting KL Rahul to bat at 5?
I don't know, because there's 2 ways of looking at this. I don't think they're going to want Sarfaraz Khan to bat in Australia at number 5, right? They might end up with Sarfaraz Khan at number 5. And so KL Rahul, whose stock is with Indian fans is -12, but it's probably his stock is about, you know, a 3 or a 4 realistically. He's one of the few players that this series really matters, right? Like, this matters a lot because a lot of his issues have been just not putting together a bunch of test matches in a row and putting runs on the board. The reason KRL is in this squad at the moment is because of Australia and England to follow, right? And so him making runs in this series is very, very important. So I do think, and if he fails, they might lose confidence with him before they get to Australia or England. So I think he's a really, really interesting one. He's obviously become the Indian fans' whipping boy, taken over from Ishant Sharma and Ajinkya Rahane. He's a much better cricketer than most Indian fans give him credit for. But his overall test record is not sensational. He has a chance here of making quite a few consistent runs in this series, putting himself in a good position when he gets to Australia, and then being a very useful player in Australia and England for India. He also has a chance of not being on one of those squads, right? Like, they've got 93 wicketkeeper batters, and maybe is Dhruv Jurel the KRL's biggest issue, because he's the backup wicketkeeper, and also if he can show that he can make runs around the world, he can. Why do you need KRL at that point anymore? So I think he's the one. I think his stock is quite low. I don't think he's going to have a massive stock jump if he plays well, because if he plays well against New Zealand and Bangladesh, that's what you expect. But it does book him in probably for at least one more tour and maybe two more tours.
He's also got a really poor injury record.
Yeah.
If you look back over the years, he's picked up so many quite strange injuries.
It's funny, actually. I was thinking about this the other day. Him and Jadeja are very athletic people. Like, you look at them and they're just naturally athletic, and you watch them move and everything. And yet both of them just pick up so many niggly things that they can't shake. Like, Jadeja just hasn't played that many test matches for someone who's been around for so long. It's really odd when you look at that.
Harsha, thanks so much for joining us. We're on the eve of the home summer. It's always an exciting time to be. It's always a great place to be. Myself and Jarrod are looking ahead to the next 5 test matches, 2 against Bangladesh, 3 against New Zealand, before, of course, India head off to Australia. And we're just asking ourselves a question, what is it that this India team really want to get out of these 5 test matches? Who better to ask, really, from your perspective? What is it that what answers do you think that India are looking for going into a series against Bangladesh and New Zealand, 2 test teams that most people would expect them to win?
Yes, for a start, try and win all 5, because that almost guarantees them a place in the World Test Championship final. As of now, the lead is very comfortable, but you win the home season, then you're guaranteeing yourself a place in that World Test Championship final. They know Australia is going to be a difficult tour. There's a couple of seasons left in that great quartet of fast bowlers, quartet of bowlers in Australia, but they'll be fresh. There's a lot of talk coming from Australia. There's a temptation, at least amongst us, to think about Australia and think about the home season as almost the curtain raiser to the real series, which is something I think they need to avoid. Hearing that Chennai is going to be a fast, bouncy pitch, and India might actually play 3 quicks and only 2 spinners. Because the last time India played Bangladesh, I think the spinners got 5 wickets in the whole series or something like that. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think it's a phenomenal 11 months in prospect for Rohit Sharma as captain too. If he can win everything, he seals his legacy.
Harsha, it's really interesting watching India be so dominant at home and people not really talk it up all that much. So if you go back to when Australia was dominant at home, it was like everyone talked about it. But the difference being is Australia were dominant at home, they were great away from home, and they won a bunch of trophies. And if you look at South Africa, that period where they didn't lose a lot but kept losing trophies, people never gave them the credit. Now they've won the World Cup. It feels like people have now started to talk up that home record again and the dominance. It really is one of the more dominant home performances we've ever seen from a test team in history, right? The last, 10 or so years.
Going back to the England tour of India in 2012.
Yeah.
It's a nice little point to start off. Joe Root making his debut in that series in 2012, to see the kind of player he's gone on to become. But since 2012, it's been an extraordinary run. Except in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, India haven't lost a series, but they've lost the odd test match. For 10 years from 2012 onwards, India were almost impossible to beat at home. But thereafter, I think England won a test match in Hyderabad, Australia won a test match. Whenever India have prepared absolute turners, they've actually been a little vulnerable, because legend has it that Indians are the best players of spin. The numbers are suggesting that India are actually better against quicker bowling than against spin in recent times. So given that, say Bangladesh, for example, three very good finger spinners, I don't think you'll get a turner. Even against England last time, I think there might have been the odd game, but otherwise the tracks were pretty good. So it gets talked about a fair bit in India, but maybe not as much overseas. South Africa is the interesting one, because I'm convinced that just as we talk about the big three, India, England, Australia, those are also the big three of the media world. And South Africa is not part of the big media world, so their performances don't get talked about as much. I mean, Hashim Amla is a legend. How often do we talk about Hashim Amla as one of the greats?
That's a good point. Talking about the big three, there was a story this week, I'm sure you saw, in India, the crowds at some of the test matches here in England, there weren't anything to write home about for a variety of reasons on day 4. And then they've crunched the numbers. Essentially, there was an article by Tim Wigmore in the Telegraph saying that, essentially showing that outside the big three, test match attendances are falling off, or certainly diminishing. What's the situation in India? Is that a similar kind of situation? It's such a different geography and place. I mean, very often, these states are very, they're so relieved to have international cricket. So it's not quite the same in England, where it's kind of the same test grounds every single year. But do you find that appetite to attend test cricket is diminishing outside of the arrival of teams like England and Australia, or is it kind of the same no matter who's playing or, wherever they are in the country?
England is the worrisome one. England is and has been for a long time the genuine home of test match cricket, because you always get crowds in England. If the crowds are diminishing in England, then that's an issue. I mean, I did 2 test matches last year, Australia versus Pakistan, in Australia, and the crowds there were okay. There weren't much to write home about. In India, we are a viewership country rather than a spectator country. By how many people actually watch it on television rather than how many people actually come to the ground. There will be a few. Chennai is a good place. Mumbai is a good place. Bangalore is a good place. So these are places where you'll get decent crowds. But if we get a full house, I doubt very much we'll get a full house.
What do you think this series means now? So traditionally, playing Bangladesh is not like the biggest deal in the world. And, Bangladesh turned out to Pakistan and surprised themselves. They've kind of assembled this incredible side. Indian fans, I've done a few podcasts, with some Indian publications recently, and Indian fans are still very skeptical of Bangladesh because no one thinks Pakistan's very good at the moment, which is an accurate description of Pakistan's test cricket. But you look at Bangladesh, and this is maybe the first time, but Bangladesh are turning up with a fully formed test team. They've got 5 bowlers they can go with. They can go with, out and out quick bowlers. They can play 3 or 4 spinners if they want to, and high quality spinners, all rounders. Their batting is coming up as well. It's probably the first time that Bangladesh has ever turned up in India, and we've thought, well, this is a team that should be fighting for a match. That doesn't mean they're going to beat India necessarily, but they're on a much higher level. If they do have a really good series, and stealing a test match may be the height of that, does that sort of change your relationship between India and Bangladesh going forward?
Relationship, we must hasten to add, because the political relationship, as you know, is under some strain at the moment because of events in Bangladesh. Hopefully that won't carry over into the test series. What I'd like to see from Bangladesh is a belief, because I genuinely believe they have a good team, but do they think they have a team that's good enough to challenge? I saw them play 2 test matches in India 3 or 4 years ago, and I don't think they believed they were there to compete. So if they believe they can, Mehdi Hasan Miraj has become a really good player. Liton Das is their best white ball player, becoming a very good red ball player too. Mushfiq and Shakib they're coming to the end, but it's not very apparent that they're coming to the end. If they can get something from the openers, I think this will be the best test match team I've seen from Bangladesh for a long time. Also largely because they've got a little bit of pace. Did you see Nahid Rana bowl? He only started playing 5 years ago, it'll be interesting to see if he can come in and make the batters hop, because there's something about genuine pace. I was excited about Taskin Ahmed, but he never became the player that we thought he would. Injuries, you talked about Pakistan. Pakistan's bowlers seem to carry injuries in their kit bag. They're forever getting injured because they're being overbowled. I feel sad for the fast bowlers in Pakistan, but genuinely, and it's not just Nahid Rana. There's Taskin, there's Hassan Mahmood, there's a few there, but real good quality spin. That's why I think India will go in with fast, bouncy, seaming tracks. In Chennai, from what I've been reading, I've not yet gone there. In Chennai, they've tried to replicate the Mumbai kind of wicket in Chennai. So if there's seam, bounce, pace with Bumrah, Siraj, Akashdeep has looked very good in the Duleep Trophy, then India might have a big advantage.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because generally when you play Bangladesh, you put out those sorts of wickets, but they've been so good on wickets that have had lateral movement and a little bit of pace. So they're not the same Bangladesh that they used to be. My final question is just on KL Rahul. India have moved on from Ishant Sharma and then Ajinkya Rahane being the whipping boys. KL Rahul is in that role at the moment. Anyone who understands cricket knows why India have him in the setup, because he's a player who can bat any position from 1 to 6, and he could be your backup wicketkeeper. And the assumption is he'll be very good in Australia or England. If he has a bad series, though, is that it? Do they move on from KL Rahul?
Because it wasn't that long ago that he went to South Africa and played a stunning innings in South Africa. It was, I mean, Sunil Gavaskar said anybody would have been proud to have played that innings. And then he only played 1 test match after that against England. He didn't play the next remaining 4 test matches. I genuinely believe, I've been a KL Rahul fan for a very long time. I genuinely believe he can play the VVS Lakshman role in Indian cricket, batting down at 5, maybe even 6. If you want a left-hander, Rishabh Pant goes up. Maybe KL Rahul bats 6, or maybe he bats at 5. If you lose a couple of early wickets, he's very good. He goes in early at number 5. I actually think this could be a takeoff point after all these years for KL Rahul.
Lastly, Harsha, before we let you go, what will Gautam Gambhir bring to this India side? What will India look like under Gautam Gambhir that was any different than how they looked under Rahul Dravid and Ravi Shastri?
Rahul Dravid very different from Ravi Shastri. Temperamentally, in terms of his approach, much more people's person. I think Ravi and Virat made a really good combination. Slightly similar characters, but I think Rohit wanted Rahul to continue for a little bit longer. But I think Gautam Gambhir is a slightly misunderstood person because of his body language, because he seems abrasive, because he seems to want to get into a fight all the time. But his record in India as a leader is actually very good. And the people who've played under Gautam Gambhir really look up to him. So there's a people's person behind Gautam Gambhir as well, which is something that will be tested. Not as much not as much in India. I think when it comes to 5 in Australia and 5 in England, that is when he will be really tested. Also, don't forget, he's come in as a coach at a time when Rohit Sharma is 37 going on 38. Ravichandran Ashwin turns 38 today. Virat Kohli is on the other side of 35. As much a father of 2 as a test match batter, dare I say, without ever questioning his commitment. But there's a lot of father and family person in him increasingly. So he's presiding over a team that's not getting younger. So it'll be a test for him.
Brilliant stuff. Harsha, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Well, I'm delighted to say that Mohammad Isam, the Bangladesh correspondent for Cricinfo and host of Crick Talk, is with us now. You must still be. I loved your tour diary, by the way, of Pakistan. What a series that was. That was screened in the UK. We were all enjoying that. Has that changed expectations ahead of this 2-test series with India, or are Bangladesh still travelling to India? Probably in the same way. I don't know if you agree, Jarrod, but remember a couple of years ago, we covered New Zealand's 2-test tour of India, and they came away with it with a credible draw, if you forgive the cliche. Ajaz Patel took 10 wickets in an innings, but they lost 1-0. And it was kind of like, do you know what? That's kind of a success. We can all kind of come away from that series feeling like everybody won, even though, of course, India just carried on. relentlessly. Series win number, I don't know, 50 million. Is that where Bangladesh are going into this series, or are they going all in to win the damn thing and surprise us all?
I think they're going to approach this series very differently than how they approached the last two tours of India, that's for sure. And that's obviously because of the Test series win in Pakistan. They didn't go to Pakistan thinking that they're going to beat Pakistan 2-0. I'm pretty sure of that. But the way they approached the Test match, they found out finally that Test match has to be played like a Test match. You have to push the opposition to the fifth day, and then you're going to look for a result. That is exactly how they're going to play in India. That's what they're saying. They have the ammunition in their batting to bat out 100 overs. They have the bowling now with two of the best spinners in the world, I think. And if you combine them together, they are a deadly duo. And they have a fast bowling attack, which now gives them that extra arsenal that they always lacked. So I think they're covered in most bases. The only thing is that they have never done well in India in a Test series. Obviously, they've had a nightmare series in 2019, which I covered in Indore and Kolkata. So for the first time, I think they're going into a Test series overseas with confidence on their back that, well, if we can take it to the fifth day, India or not, we have a chance.
It's really interesting because we weren't sure where Shakib Al Hasan was emotionally, and we're never sure where Shakib Al Hasan is emotionally. Very funny story that came out of the Global T20 tournament with him just before he went to Pakistan. But now that you look at him and you've got Shakib Al Hasan, who still seemingly wants to play Test cricket and is fully interested in that, and Mahdi Hassan is just becoming the all-rounder that he's been hinting at for the last couple of years. So suddenly they have like their own version of Jadeja and Ashwin, not on the same level of bowling, but on batting, maybe even at, slightly higher, right? And then this other thing happens, which is there are seam bowlers everywhere. That the opening bowler who was brilliant in the World Cup isn't even in this squad and didn't play against Pakistan either. You've got Naheed Rana, who's bowling very, very quick. Tuskin Ahmed, Khalil Ahmed bowled really well at times as well. They've got a 5-person bowling attack that suits Indian conditions. And I was thinking, when was the last time any team turned up with like that depth and that variety? And they've got backup spinners as well. Like if it's going to spin, they might go with 3 spinners, right? And 2 quicks. If India, like they did last time against Bangladesh, put out green wickets, Bangladesh are like, okay, well, that's what Pakistan tried to do against us. We've also won it. We've won a Test match in New Zealand, and now we beat Pakistan on green wickets. Suddenly, it's one of the more balanced lineups in world cricket. After it wasn't that long ago, I remember sending you a message going, this player batting at number 7, he's playing as a specialist number 7 batter. So they've gone from having no balance in their side to having one of the more balanced lineups in world cricket.
Absolutely. And this was always on the cards if they got their act together. I mean, it has been such a long time that Shakib, being one of the best all-rounders in the world, he still couldn't balance the team because they couldn't figure out exactly how many bowlers they need. They would often go with 3 bowlers or 4 bowlers in a Test match, especially in a Test match. That's where their, muddled thinking came up almost all the time. I think New Zealand gave them the correct message in 2022 that they have fast bowlers who can win them matches. Mehdi Hasan Miraj and Nazmul Hossain Shanto, the captain, they kept saying one word that we needed a reference. We need a reference to win. I think it's true for any walk of life that if you have a reference to of success, you're going to repeat it. And I think now that they have a bit of balance, they have a number 7 in Liton Das, who is a good batter. They have Mehdi, who bats at 8, I think is too deep at number 8. I think maybe it's time that since Shakib's has an eye condition and he's not scoring runs, they might be tempted to put Mehdi in one of those innings in India. You never know, depending on the situation. That's how good he is right now, or he has been for the last couple of years with the bat. And the pace attack, I mean, it's my favorite story. I mean, it is rare to see in cricket that a type of bowling was being shoved to one side, just being told that, no, you're not good enough. And then one by one, it was Taskin Ahmed whose comeback story inspired all the other fast bowlers to see and, to revolutionize the pace attack. And then you had Ibadat, whose average came down from the 90s to the 50s in that Mount Maunganui Test alone. And then, him doing well in the ODIs, and you have Hassan Mahmood, you have Tanzim Hassan Shakib, you have Nahid Rana now, and even the left arm quick Shoriful Islam, he also adds to this attack. And the interesting thing is, now even the fast bowlers are batting slightly better, which was always a problem because they had a long tail. Hassan Mahmood lasted for 2 hours against Pakistan when everyone had given up on that innings, that when Mehdi got out 191 for 7, I think. And then he batted for 2 hours and frustrated Pakistan to no ends. Then you have Shoriful who can hit the ball. You have Taskin who can bat. So suddenly, as you rightly mentioned, that Bangladesh has suddenly become an interesting cricket team.
Can you tell us a little bit more detail about Nahid Rana? Because, of course, for those who aren't, following Bangladesh closely, like you and Jarrod do, he may become as a little bit of a surprise. So, what can we expect to see from him?
Nahid Rana is a tall fast bowler, as you've already seen. He's from the northwest of the country, the northwestern border with India. He took up cricket in late 2019, like serious cricket ball. We have a version called tape ball cricket, tape tennis. He used to play that, and his family said, no, you can't take up cricket seriously until you finish your college exam. So like equivalent to his A level. So once he's done that, he joined the cricket academy, and his coach, the first day he saw Nahid Rana, decided that this is a special talent. We don't see a guy bowling so quick that the wicketkeeper has to let the ball go. He didn't come through the under-19 or the age group route that all cricketers in Bangladesh take. So that is another interesting thing. He took a lot of first-class wickets at a very good average in the last 3 seasons, I think. That was his main grounding, I think, bowling a lot of overs in first-class cricket, because he didn't really do well in the BPL, but he did very well in first-class cricket. They gave him a test debut earlier this year, and now, as you've seen, you'll see more of the same. If Indian pitches offer a bit of bounce, he has that ability to, rear up the ball from a good length with his height. He's got a good wrist position, and he has a bowling action that first-class batters in Bangladesh have complained about in terms of how quick the arm rolls, and it is disconcerting for them. And he's tried to keep that. His coaches, the coaches have tried to keep that old action, just extended his run-up, fixed his landing, I think, because he had a problem with the no ball early on in his life. But 4 years ago, this guy had just started taking up cricket ball practice, and now here he is. We are talking about him.
Simple question. Is he the fastest bowler in Bangladesh history already?
He is the fastest bowler in Bangladesh cricket ever. I've never heard of anyone averaging 145 and then touching 150 once or twice every match or every day. Yeah, he is the fastest ever.
And at the end of the series, despite all of that, if you were offered a 1-0 series defeat with a credible draw and maybe even a Bangladeshi bowler taking all 10 wickets in an innings, would you take that?
I don't think this team will settle for that at this moment, because I think the message in Pakistan was loud and clear from the captain that they want a team performance, a wholesome performance. They're not looking for individual stuff. So you had one guy getting out in the 190s, trying to play across the line. Mushfiq Rahim never does that, just trying to pick up the run rate for the team. You had Shubman getting on in the 90s, doesn't really care. You had Zakir Hassan, a new guy in the team, going after Pakistan in the 4th innings. That really made a difference in that chase. So, and then you have the fast bowlers bowling in the heat. So I think if you're from a prediction point of view, it could be 2-0, obviously, for India, but Bangladesh wouldn't settle for anything less than a test win, their first test win in India. So, we never know. I mean, if they put their acts together, especially if their batting comes together, it might be an interesting result. I'm not going to predict anything for Bangladesh at this moment, but it is a possibility that they will not settle for anything less than a win.
There's very little doubt which player most people want to see, and that's Rishabh Pant back playing Test cricket. For all of the big shots and the big personality, it does seem like Test cricket and Rishabh Pant go hand in hand better than 2020 cricket or ODI cricket. I mean, IPL maybe, but it's just going to be great to see him back, really, isn't it? I mean, he comes into it. He hasn't played Test cricket for a couple of years. We know about the horrendous. Just the fact that he can play again is just a phenomenal position to find yourself in when you consider where he was 2 years ago. So, it seems maybe a little bit crass to talk about stock reports in and around such an enigmatic character, Rishabh Pant. I suppose whatever happens, his stock's going to go up just walking out onto the field.
Yeah, and I think it is low just because, we don't know exactly where he's going to start back off. I thought in the IPL watching him, there were times which we saw the old Rishabh Pant, and there are other times where he looked a little bit unsure of himself. I think you're right. I actually think Test cricket is his most natural format. He can attack in Test cricket without worrying about the 5 men out. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
He doesn't have
Totally.
to. Like some of the shots I watch him play in ODIs and T20 cricket, it's like, well, he's playing this shot because he's worked out that that's the place to hit the boundary. Whereas actually in Test cricket, he doesn't have to worry about that. He just plays his shots until everyone's on the boundary, and then he just tries to whack a bunch of sixes when he's already set, right? Which suits him a lot better. So yeah, look, his stock is low just because he hasn't played. So getting out on the field gives him a bump. They will give him all 5 tests, would be my guess, unless he comes up a little bit sore or isn't feeling it. He was on the path to greatness as a Test player, right? What we have to see now is what impact everything has had on him, right? But from my perception, he still should be on that path to greatness. There aren't many wicketkeepers who've ever averaged over 40, and then when you add his strike rate, he's on a completely different level to quite a lot of players, and he's one of the most exciting players in the world. So yeah, he should only go up from here. I think that's the obvious thing for him.
Ravi Jadeja. I take it India are going to go in with Jadeja and Ashwin and either a third spinner or a third seamer. So let's go. Jadeja and Ashwin will play. So Jadeja, he had a funny series against England. I think it was player of the match in one game. I think he missed a match because of injury. Something happened, didn't it? And he also played. Did he miss a defeat? Either way, it was a little bit disjointed, his last Test outing against England. So what do you reckon? He comes into this 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10. I mean, all the Indian players are so high. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, he would probably be an 8, right? The interesting thing for him is that, so I do a podcast with Megha Sinha, and she was sort of saying that that there is a sort of a thought that Akshar Patel is ready to take over from Ravi Jadeja, in that his batting has improved so much over the last 2 years, even if his bowling hasn't quite been at the same level. And if you think about where they're playing next, Jadeja shouldn't be as useful in Australia as Akshar Patel just because of the height, right? Akshar Patel is a ridiculously high release. So it's a weirdly more important series for Ravi Jadeja than you would think. But when it comes down to it, he's still been averaging, around mid-30s in the last couple of years with the bat. And I find it hard to believe that Akshar Patel is going to be able to replicate that in Test cricket straight away. If he does take that job. And I see Akshar Patel as more of a number 8. So you would assume that Jadeja comes in, but he is 35 now. He's another one of these players. He's just, he's looking towards the end of his career. He still looks a lot younger than the other 35-year-olds around the world, but he is starting to put the miles on his body, and he's always been quite injury prone. So it'd be quite interesting from that point of view. The double spinner thing, I mean, obviously Jadeja and Ashwin would be the first choices here. But they probably would have wanted to play Kuldeep, right? And now they're in a situation where they probably can't play Kuldeep, and they probably have to go with the third seamer by the look of what the wicket is going to be. I still think it's going to spin a lot, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. But they might go 3 seamers, 2 spinners rather than 3 spinners and 2 seamers, and in the way that they would have. But the question is it automatic now that Ashwin plays ahead of Kuldeep? Right? I mean, Kuldeep's last couple of years have absolutely been wild. And while he's not the batter that Ashwin is, he certainly has been improving as a batter every time we've seen him. So
yeah, he batted that part. He put in that partnership, didn't he, against England in the 4th Test match?
So we're now in a position, I think, when you look at their 2 great spinners who are 35 and 38, and you've got Akshar Patel coming up, who is, I once called him the Walmart Ravindra Jadeja, just because he does everything that Jadeja does, not quite at the same level. but he's coming through, and they love him. They love him as a professional. They love him. You know, he obviously has got some captaincy experience. You know, there's a lot of really cool things about Akshar Patel. And then you've got the left arm wrist spinner who no one in the world can really play in Kuldeep Yadav when he's at his best with Ashwin. So they've got some and they've got some decisions to make. Are Ashwin and Jadeja automatically 1 and 2? I kind of think they are, and you still start with them. But by the time they get, it's not really as much of an issue for Bangladesh and New Zealand, right? Because they could go in many different directions in that series, and they're probably still going to win. When they get to Australia, they can only pick 2 of the 4 spinners, right? Jadeja probably has to play because they need him at number 7. Then where do they go? Do they go the wrist spinner in Kuldeep, or do they go Ashwin? So there's, you know, and as we talked about before, perhaps Akshar Patel's bowling will be more useful in Australia just because he's taller. So there are some questions coming up for these 2 spinners, despite the fact that it wasn't that long ago that Ravindra Jadeja would have been the first name on every team sheet in the world. I don't think his form has slipped much from there, but the situation that Indian cricket has got in, because they have these other 2 incredibly talented players around them, I think has changed a lot, right? And so they are in a new position. So let's say they want Kuldeep to play over Ashwin in Australia, right? So that's not a slight on Ashwin. I think Ashwin would do very, very well if he played in Australia, also because he's tall again. And he's worked out how to bowl in Australia after, you know, years of going back there. But if they want Kuldeep to play in Australia, don't they want Kuldeep to bowl as many overs as possible coming into that series? So they have to think about it, and it's such a position of strength, right? It's funny, there's a couple of teams in the world that just have ridiculous selection problems at the moment based on strength, not weakness. So Australia's is hilarious, where every all-rounder from Western Australia is like 6'4", broad-shouldered, bowls right arm, medium, fast, medium. And it's like, how do you fit all these dudes in one team? Like you can't. Like, you know, you could have Stoinis, Marsh, Green, and Hardy. Like, you can't fit them all. They all do the same thing, right? And West Indies is another one where you have all these, they have all these all-round talents, but again, they all bowl medium fast and all want to bowl, fast medium, and they all want to bat in the same sort of position in the side. And you get to India and you're just like, they might have the 4 best spinners in the world, but you can't play all 4 of them. And there's a massive overlap between Akshar and Jadeja. So I think it's a really fascinating situation of how they think about this, because traditionally against Bangladesh, you would probably think to yourself, okay, we don't need to roll out our best players. We can maybe try some prospects, or we can try some players that we want to get some time into. That may be not the case against Bangladesh. Might be the case against New Zealand. Bangladesh is a team who should be getting 3 tests here, and New Zealand's one should be getting 2, right? Like certainly on current form, that's where you would be going. So it's quite a fascinating thing of how they put all this together, and you know how Gambia, who's just come in, who knows, maybe he likes Akshar more, or you know,
that could be one of his first calls, right?
Yeah,
one of his first plays.
And maybe he says to Ashwin, "Look, we're not saying that anything has slipped in your talent at all. All we are saying is you're getting to 38. Let's use you when we have to use you." And when we don't have to use you, we've got other options now. Like there are multiple things that they can do with some of these players going ahead. There's no reason why Ashwin couldn't have the sort of treatment that we all thought Anderson could have got, which is just play him when you need him and keep him around the squad as your spin coach the rest of the time.
That kind of covers off the spinners. Let's talk about Mohammed Siraj. His role is going to be bumped up essentially. You know, there's no Mohammed Shami. So Siraj will play. And of course, I'm not sure, will Bumrah play all 5? Will Siraj play all 5? I mean, they did rest and rotate against England earlier this year, so it's unlikely both will play, or either will play all 5. What is Mohammed Siraj's role within this side then? Now he's he's an opening bowler, and he's one of the 2 go-to men essentially within this side now.
So I think I think you're right about Bumrah. I think he probably plays 3 of these 5, doesn't he? And depending on conditions, you know, they might get away with 2, but I think 3 is perfect for him. So Siraj has 2 different roles. I think he's very comfortable when he's the number 2 or the number 3. There's not a lot of pressure on him. It works. If it doesn't work, they'll throw the ball back to, you know, a spinner or to Bumrah, and they can bring it back, right? The problem with Siraj seems to be when he realizes he has to be the number 1 bowler. And if you go to IPL, you see the same thing in IPL. The problem with Siraj isn't talent. His best ball is as good as anyone's best ball in world cricket. I've never seen anyone seam the ball at pace the way that he does, right? But he doesn't know how to repeat that best ball consistently. And he doesn't have he's very similar to Stuart Broad in that they're both rhythm bowlers, but the difference is that Stuart Broad was still 6'5" or whatever, however tall Stuart Broad is. So when he's bad, he can just whack it in on a length and bowl a little bit defensive and doesn't cost anything. When Siraj is bad, it's like he skids onto the bat and people just punish him. This is an interesting series because Shami is old and injury prone. Jasprit Bumrah is never going to play consistently. That's not the way that they're going to ever play him. They need a bowler who, on the games when Shami is injured and Bumrah is not available, that steps up as the number one seamer. And when we've seen Siraj try and do that so far, it hasn't worked. So I would hope that he gets a couple of chances in this series to do that, and he starts to work it out, right? He just starts to work out how to bowl within himself at times when his body's not completely doing what it wants to do, and he finds a way to probe. Look, he's a fantastic bowler. You know, they've got 3 other seamers. Sorry, they've got 2 other seamers in the squad, and I don't think either of those seamers are potential frontline, senior bowlers right now. So Siraj is going to be the main guy, and he also has to get used to the fact that in Australia and England, being the second best bowler in the side or the second best seamer in the side is really important, right? It's not as important in India, but when you get to those other places, and we've seen Siraj occasionally slip up in that role. So they just need him to get to a level of consistency where as long as he's not getting smashed and he's putting some pressure on, and then he only needs one spell to win a game for India, right? I mean, that's the thing with Siraj. He gets his wickets in such clusters that when it all comes together, he can win a game. They just need the other side of his game to just step up a little bit. His ceiling isn't the problem. His floor is the problem.
If Rohit Sharma comes in as a 9, Jaiswal comes in as a 9, Kohli, maybe we were saying an 8, Rahul, possibly a 6 or 7 because he hasn't played an injury. Rishabh Pant.
Rahul, I think I'd Rahul as a 4, didn't I?
4. Shubman Gill is an 8. Siraj, 7 or 8. Jasprit Bumrah, 10.
Yeah. I mean,
What can you say?
It's funny, we do a podcast on my network called Crick Picks, where like we all like draft players for different categories.
Yeah.
And every time Bumrah is involved in a draft, he goes first.
Yeah, he's like Eric Haaland. If you're doing fans, so you have the same in Premier League football. Everyone has to have Haaland.
Yeah.
You just have to have it. And it's really boring. Actually, Bumrah isn't boring at all. Haaland actually is a bit boring. It's not even really that good to watch. But he's got the cheat code and you just have to buy in. Bumrah's better than that. He's like some kind of 12th level mega boss that, just appears and is just ridiculous and is just playing a different game to everybody else. But essentially, he's a 10. Yeah.
He's probably the first bowler since Glenn McGrath to be the world's best bowler in all 3 formats, right? And Glenn McGrath didn't play a lot of T20 cricket, but at the end of his career was still a fantastic T20 player and probably was there before guys like Lasith Malinga sort of took that over. And Dale Steyn, because of Malinga, maybe never quite got to the all 3 formats, but he wasn't far away. But you look at Bumrah, and you could make an argument that he's the first bowler, let alone seamer, that you take in all 3. And at the same time, he's got the skills of a spin bowler with the pace of a fast bowler. He's got an awkward action. He learnt bowling backwards, which is a really interesting thing going ahead, because he learned all the skills that you have to learn when you're bowling on flat wickets with rubber balls, essentially, because that's where it came from. And then when he got to the top level, he also learned all the skills that you need that you need for turf wickets and normal bowling, swinging and all these sorts of things. So he kind of learnt bowling backwards, and because of that has these incredible variety in what he can do. When during that last World Cup final, when he comes on, South Africa were massively ahead in that game, and I don't know what the odds were, but they were almost unbackable, and I was like, no, because Bumrah's here, right? Like the difference of that is he just And you watch the way that South Africa play him in that over, and they're just like, this is something else. And it's really interesting. We've got a couple of players in world cricket at the moment. We've got Sophie Eccleston, who's about to come up to a World Cup. We just like, when Bumrah or Sophie Eccleston come in, it doesn't really matter what the pitch is, and it doesn't really matter what the match situation is. They have the ability to reverse any of those things for their teams. And Bumrah can do it, I think, in all three formats so consistently. If you wanted him to bowl bouncers, he could do that. If you wanted him to bowl defensively, he can do that. If you want him to bowl attacking, if you want him to swing it, if you want him to seam it, he can do every single job above average level at the moment. And my biggest worry is just injuries with him, right? Like, what's he got? 140 test match wickets. He's got 15 test matches scheduled over the next year. Wouldn't it be great if he plays 9 of them? But
definitely.
no one thinks no one thinks he's going to play 15, right? It's impossible. Like, as you said, resting is one thing, but also just the injuries that he has. And I also think just because of the way his physicality is, he is a bowler who's slightly better on rest, compared to, there are some bowlers who can kind of bowl always crocked, right? Do you know what I mean? Courtney Walsh could always bowl whether he was fully fit or not, and you had no problem with it. Whereas you see some other bowlers where it's just like they just need to be a little bit fresher, and I think Bumrah is probably one of those. And when he's completely fresh, I don't know how you play him.
Good stuff. Well, Jarrod, I think that brings us to the end of the show. So we'll be back next week, I suppose, looking back at that Bangladesh first test match. Hopefully Rishabh Pant plays. Gautam Gambhir's first test as India coach. See if Siraj, steps up. See if Bangladesh can spring the mother of all surprises and derail India's quest for that World Test Championship final place. But they've got to win this time. They can't just keep rocking up and losing. But yeah, thanks for joining us here, and I'll see you next week.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.